All right. I'm Brian McKnight, and I'm here with Professor Don Leech in the history department. I was talking with Dr. Leach just a minute ago, and the thing that got me interested in doing something like this are those memes on Facebook where it says, this is what my friends think I do for a living, and this is what I do for a living. And I started thinking about it, particularly with all this coronavirus stuff going on, how what we do has changed a little bit, but fundamentally why we do it and how we do it hasn't changed much at all. It's just, we're doing it in a different way temporarily. So I called my colleague, Dr. Leach, and he is the guinea pig for this little experiment. So we'll hope this goes well. If it doesn't, we'll try to edit the mistakes out.
Glad to give it a try. Happy to do so.
Well, the first thing I wanted to really just talk about is, what do you do as a historian that most people probably don't even think is important in what we do?
As a historian, I think a lot of people think of it as we just know a lot of facts about history, which to some extent is true, but it perhaps is not the most important element. It doesn't really matter precisely as to, when was the Battle of Hastings fought, exactly what date, for example. But what we do as historians is we're getting in there in the sources, the reading materials from that historical period, as well as other historians, and really trying to understand through reading texts what's going on, why is it going on, and really trying to interpret things. It's really putting a puzzle together. It's a useful skill for today as well as for historians, but they think we're just sort of learning facts, but we're just trying to decipher what people wrote hundreds of years ago.
I run into the same thing as a Civil War historian. I'll go out on a battlefield with people and they'll say, when was this? How many people were killed in this battle? And I'll be like, 10, 15,000. And they'll look at me like, what do you know? Well, I kind of know why the war was fought. That's really important.
Yeah.
But, some of the micro details, a lot of people, myself, speaking for myself only, sometimes those things just go by the wayside. We spend all our time thinking about the big picture things. We've been teaching for the past couple of months online in one way or the other.
Yeah.
How has that worked for you?
We got thrown into it in the middle of the semester, so it was something and that's through no one's fault. We all had to make the adjustment. And so it wasn't something I could plan for. So it's been very difficult adjustment. And I think that biggest challenge I've had is trying to keep in regular communication with students and keep them sort of online. When they're in the classroom, you sort of see them there, you can talk to them, you get a sense of things. But it's been a real challenge. But I think by getting a lot of material to them, recorded lectures and things like that, I think it went okay, but it was a real challenge. Were you able to keep fairly regular communication with your students?
I felt good about what I was doing. Now, I wasn't exactly sure what they were getting from what I was doing. One of the great things about the classroom is that there's an accountability there both ways. They know if I'm screwing up, or at least they should, and I know if they're screwing up. Well, with this, there was just no way to tell. I think I shared this with you in an email earlier. I would put these little Easter eggs in my lectures. I'd say, okay, at this point, send me an email with World War II in the subject line, and that way I know when you've watched this video. Well,
Yeah.
like 2 weeks later, I'm getting a couple of emails. So they're clearly not on top of things. But at the same
Yeah.
time, I'm no better because I was joking with somebody not long ago, and I said, I've got like a 50-minute lecture to do. I'll start it at 8 a.m. and I'll finish it at 10 p.m. It'll take
Oh,
all day for me to do a 50-minute lecture.
yeah. Trying to sort it out.
So,
And
it's just a hard way to do it, particularly, I think, if you're a lecture person.
mhm,
We're lucky because we can deliver the lecture, but
yeah.
at the same time, you never know what they're getting, how they're getting it. There are a lot of distractions. I have a TV right up there,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and I know they do too. So, are they watching me? Are they listening to me? Or is there something really good on TV? Or
They
is
got the
the
lecture
cell
on
phone here?
yeah. Too many sidetracks at all. And, and I don't want to do little busy work things just to say, that Easter egg's a great idea because it's not busy work. It's just a quick test to see have they watched the video. I don't want to do a lot of, little quizzes and things. It really piles the students up. And I have a feeling a lot of them were just waiting until the end of the semester and then I'm going to watch all the videos in one go.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was probably a bit of putting things off, especially if they have technical issues. But plugged away, did it, but it's not the same as the classroom at all. But
The students seem to do okay with it. I mean, they didn't knock anything out of the park in my experience, and I had a couple of students who kind of disappeared at the last minute, and I'm not quite sure why they would have. Their grades didn't identify them as students who would disappear. So I'm kind of wondering if I'm going to hear from them in a week or two, and something like that.
yeah,
But how did you test? I found that the prospect of giving them a test remotely, I didn't feel good about that.
yeah, I ended up just and again in history, I think we're fortunate. We have some flexibility in that I basically just made them write type essays and then they submitted them onto the what's called Moodle, right? Our classroom software. So it's just write essays, click them in, and then I could grade them using the pen on the screen on the iPad. So I mean, it actually that kind of worked. It was a lot of work for me grading a lot of essays, but it was better than just trying to hit some multiple choice and throw them back at me.
I did the same thing. I always, whenever I give a semester test, I'll usually give half of it in essay form and half of it in like a multiple choice
Yeah.
because I want them to be accountable for some of this information. But I didn't necessarily trust myself or them to do the multiple choice because there is an internet out there that
Right.
might make
Yeah.
that a little easier than normal.
At least with essay, if someone attempted to plagiarize, that's easier to find.
Yeah.
Like the words.
Yeah,
But
and
on the whole,
I told mine
students did pretty
specifically,
well
I
with it.
said, you can use course notes or your text, but nothing beyond that.
Yeah.
And it seemed, I think most of them went by that pretty well.
Yeah, and I got pretty good results from them. Like I said, for the most part, I was quite pleased with the students' response to this situation. They're thrown into all online classes by us trying to scramble and figure it out as we go. And on the whole, I thought the response by most of the students, they did the work, they did pretty good work or sometimes excellent work, and they made it through. I was quite pleased with how the students handled it on the whole.
I had the same kind of experience. The freshman students, I was a little more concerned about, but for the most part, they did okay.
Yeah.
A few of them were really on top of things. My upper level students, they were fine, but the only problem I ever have with them is, one will go missing, an assignment will go missing for a day or two, and I'll message them and they'll say, "Oh, I forgot that." Or,
Yeah.
I'm halfway done, I'll have it to you by the morning. And I'm usually okay with that. But overall,
Yeah.
I was surprised.
Yeah. And if you know the student, you can work with them. And it's funny, we're sitting here talking about teaching and teaching online, and that's something that, again, people perhaps don't think about when someone's a historian, a professor, right? A lot of our job is teaching.
Yeah.
You know, we're not trained teachers. We're not trained in graduate school as teachers. We're trained researchers and writers.
Well, let me ask you, what did you draw on to be a teacher? How did you train yourself to be a teacher?
That's a good question. I probably people who taught me in the past. Yes, people who taught me in the past. I think you sort of realize what worked in the classroom for me, what teachers or professors did I respect, and try to model that behavior, you know, and that's approach to teaching. And then just realize pretty quickly you have to be yourself in the classroom. If you try to be something else, someone else, the students see right through it.
Yeah.
So partly modeling what works and partly just getting up there and saying, here I am and here's the material, you know.
a lot of mine is basically Tom Costa and Brian Wills and Preston Mitchell, because they taught the lion's share of my undergrad courses, and Lou Ellsworth too.
Yeah.
But you know, it's funny, if you're like me, a lot of the things that I've spent a lot of time working on over the years are avoiding the things that I didn't like from my professors.
yeah, that too. Yeah. The type of approach or the type of tests or, yeah, it's like, no, those are terrible. Yeah.
Yeah. I was never a big fan of group work. And I know some of our colleagues do real well with group work. Yeah. But I was always the guy who had to do all the work for the group, the other three people.
Yeah, that was always the problem. There's ways of doing it, you know, that people are really skilled at making sure everybody's accountable. But even hearing from the students when I talk to them about, you know, what they think works for them in the classroom, it's good to get their feedback. Most of them come back and say, don't give us group work. We hate it.
Well, let me ask you this. You said something about feedback.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure you look at it the same way. This semester, there are really no evaluations, you know,
right.
Student evaluations. But I really, and I don't think I'm alone, I've always really taken those things pretty seriously when they, you know, when they're worth taking seriously.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody evaluates your teaching based on how much they like your haircut, you know, I'm not so sure you need to, I'm not so sure that's very serious. What do you think about evaluations? Do evaluations do justice to what we do? Student evaluation?
Like you said, it's a mixed bag. You get a fair number of the students just sort of check through them. And then you get the student that didn't have a good experience for whatever reason and sits there and hammers you. And that's fine. You're like, okay, what got this student ticked off at me? So I will still look at that to an extent. And then you get the positive ones. So it's us being historians again. I have to look at the source and interpret it and read it and sort out what's useful and what isn't. And I can't just take them and just add up the numbers and say, oh, look, I got a whole bunch of 4.5s. That doesn't work, you know.
Whatever a 4.5 is, right?
Yeah, out of 10, I don't know. So, yeah, they are useful, but you really have to sort of, again, pick out what they're saying, figure out if the student's putting much into it or not. You know?
I think I'll attribute it to Mark Clark, but he may have come across it from someone else, but he said basically you take out like the best ones and throw them out, and you take out the worst ones and throw them out, and you look in the middle and see what they're saying about what you're doing.
Yeah,
I think there may be some truth in that.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, because the best ones, I guess sometimes you have a little fan club, but the worst ones are someone that just things didn't click for you at all. So yeah, that's a pretty good one. But a lot of the ones in the middle are just sometimes just the students is checking boxes too. So
I love it when they write things down. Sometimes they don't want to write a lot of stuff down, but That's where we get our feedback from.
Yeah, yeah, those are the best ones. The scores are sort of just doing their thing. Yeah. So, but at least that's a tool. It's very hard to do, good feedback. So they're useful. I wouldn't want my job to depend on them, but they're useful.
Yeah. I wouldn't want my job to depend on them like a lot of public school teachers have to have their jobs depending on them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Talk a little bit, if you will, about what we do as researchers.
As researchers, that's the fun part. Although I do like teaching. That sounded bad, but this is what we were trained at. This is what I went into history as. And research, right? You're coming up with some questions on a historical issue, and then you're trying to find out, well, where is the material on that? And for me, as a medievalist doing medieval Britain, every once in a while I get to fly to Britain and go to one of the archives there and go rooting through the material, which is a lot of fun, and then so forth. But you're looking at you're coming at it with a problem, looking at what other historians have maybe talked a little bit about the problem, and then going in and finding what material you can, and then reading it from there.
I think I hear a cat. Is that me or you?
It's a cat. I mean, it wants out. I may have to disappear from camera for like 10 seconds.
Go ahead.
Get this desperate cat out of the office. 1 second.
Well, we've had our first technical challenge.
Okay. And I'm back.
Yeah, you are. Getting back to what we were talking about with research, at a small school, you're teaching 4 classes. In particular, in your field, you don't just get in the car and go do research. You have to plan this for maybe years in advance, and then come up with $3,000 to actually make it happen.
Yeah.
What kind of challenge is that?
Oh, I mean, the school has been very supportive. There is some budget available, which is great. And so I can go typically about once every 3 or 4 years over to England. But what you're doing is I need to do as much homework as possible. What materials might there be in the archive that I can find? And then when I get there, I've got to make the absolute most of my time, because I'm not coming back for another 4 years. So I've got to go through as much material. This is what's great about now, digital photography. I can photograph lots and lots of documents and then come back and then just work with them at home. That's been a lifesaver, because you're only over there for a couple of weeks or so. So I've got to get as much information as I can and hope I've got what I need that'll carry me over for the next few years.
I've always been a big fan of digial photography when it comes to research. You go out of town, you're looking at all these documents, and it really is it's a question of collecting information.
Yeah.
You can analyze it later, but you've got to collect the information. And I've known people who would sit there and actually work through the documents in the archive. And for me, if I've only got 2 days, I'm going to collect a lot of information. I can work through it at home.
Right. But that's old school, before digital photography, when that's what researchers had to do. They'd spend, the whole summer or a whole semester, if they had a sabbatical, sitting in the archive, hand noting everything. So it certainly made my life a lot easier. But then the work's coming back here and then working through each document and seeing if you find the answers to your questions, which sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have new questions that pop up, which is fun. Yeah.
You know, what you said is really wise in two or three different ways. Number one, um, I never finished a research project with more questions answered than I had in the beginning. You know, I always, or fewer questions answered. Yeah, I always finished a research project with tons of new questions. You
Yeah,
know, in the
yeah.
beginning, and I think it's that way if you're like a college student. You know, whenever I started college, I knew everything. I didn't know, I didn't need to answer or ask any questions because I knew.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And when I finished my PhD, I couldn't answer a question because I didn't know anything.
I know. You spend
I
all
mean,
these years, 12 years at school, and like, I don't know
I could
anything.
not give you an answer. I could give you 12, but I could not give you an answer. And
Yeah,
there's another
exactly.
aspect, something else you mentioned, is not finding stuff. You know, a lot of people assume that when you go to an archive and you get in there and you've got all these documents surrounding you, that you're going to
Yeah.
get everything you need.
Hmm. No, I had a trip in, I think it was 2012, and I was looking at jail records. I said, there's all these jail records. So you can have the people and the crimes, and you also have the juries who are leading citizens. And I can really track down a lot of the people that I've been looking for. This is the city of Coventry in the 15th century. And I can track down a lot of these people I've been trying to follow or find or whatever. So I went there and got all these jail records and came back, and I'm like, there's nothing. These people are just not these people, and there's no leads from these guys. It's just more names with no links. And basically, a whole trip will probably produce a few paragraphs of writing in something else rather than a major project. And then the thing about that, of course, right, I didn't go back to England until 2016. So from 2012 to 2016, I'm like, okay, 3 paragraphs of work got. So it can be really, really brutal. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's funny. I tell people when they ask, you know, doing historical research is sort of like gold mining.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just find nothing. But even if you find nothing, you know that you've looked and you don't need to look there again.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And sometimes you find a little bit. Most of the time you find a little bit. Every now
Mm-hmm.
and then you hit a real jackpot.
Oh yeah, those are fun when you're
Yeah, yeah.
cycling through. And you're like, oh yes.
They don't happen often, but they're fun. I'll tell you one of the biggest jackpots I ever hit. 19th century US history. One of the most valuable things out there are pardon records from governors.
Ah.
Because in order to petition a governor for a pardon, you have to admit what you did
Right.
and admit it in detail, which
Oh.
is really nice because you're getting people basically confessing to crimes they committed in small communities where you don't really have any other really written sources. So you can find a lot of really great things in pardon records.
Oh yeah, it's just finding that class of records that were I had a little one. It's not an earth-shattering one, but there's fun ones where I was looking through financial records for the chamberlains, who are the guys responsible for keeping up the city wall and the streets and things like that. Really boring, loads of gravel and sand and stone. It's like, no, 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 no. But in there too, they were sometimes doing other things. That's why I had to track through, because there's sometimes other expenditures. So you're going through list after list. And then there's one where they're paying the laborer 3 pennies to take down the heads and parts from the city gates. And this was in 1525 when there was a really big rebellion. And it was never clear what happened to the leaders of that rebellion. Well, now we know.
Yeah, now we know.
Their heads were put on the city gates. So a little thing like that, you're like, ooh. You know, and then you're back to loads of sand and gravel and stuff again. You know. Popped in right there. Yeah.
Well, Don, this has been our first one of these. So
Okay.
we'll see how it goes. if I hope I learn something from the process. Actually, what I really hope is that it's all smooth and we know everything that we need to know. I suspect that I'm going to learn a lot over time how to do this more efficiently.
I'll try not to have a cat stuck in the office next time.
Well, you should have had the cat up on the desk with you.
Yes, yeah, they do sometimes walk right in front of the camera. But there's lots of things that I think would be great to discuss if you ever want, like public history, in terms of how do we as academics talk to the public, and how do they react to us and things like that. I think there's lots of great questions.
Well, one of the things that I want to get back to you about is this concept of the commons and how it's viewed and how it really exists in the United States. We don't think about things like, green spaces and parks as the traditional commons, but they really are.
Yeah, commons really got sort of, I wouldn't say written out of American history, but it's sort of the concept has become really buried under the whole idea of private property and privatization, right?
Yeah, I think the capitalistic system sees a problem with the concept of the commons.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but that's something that I want to talk to you about in the future. We'll get this posted and see how everything goes. But Don Leech, thank you for visiting with us today.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.